bit out of the lecture to make it shorter, because what I want to do in the last maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes, is go over assignment 3 with you in this class today. I have posted up a video with, it's only about 10 minutes long, about how to do assignment 3. Does anyone watch this? Does anyone know it exists? Some people are aware it exists. This is good. I'll make it into a thing. Sorry, I'll make it into a thing in a bit. But first of all, I want to talk about a very, very important aspect of media theory. So, this is a switch. The content that we've done over the last 3 weeks is, broadly speaking, all from the same area. We're all in the sort of political economy of the media and how ownership affects the ideological content of the media. This is a switch to a very different area of media theory. By a show of hands, who has heard of a man called Marshall McLuhan before? 1, 2. Some people are like, maybe. In what context would you have heard of Marshall McLuhan? Amazing.
He was in that William Merritt thing that's really...
He was mentioned in William Merrin's thing that you had to read. Yeah, the assignment which you get the grades back for Thursday. Oh yeah, it's going to be exciting. That's why I get everyone to do the module feedback before the grades come out. Yeah, you think I'm a fucking idiot? No. Okay, so as an adjournment to that, you have all done very well, and I'm very proud of each and every one of you. Okay, but yeah, he was mentioned in William Merritt's chapter. Marshall McLuhan is a very, very important figure. Marshall McLuhan is a Canadian. Let's not hold that against him. There have been some good Canadians. Not a lot. You know, Avril Lavigne, she sucks. Bryan Adams, he sucks. More than Canvas sucks. But Marshall McLuhan is a good Canadian. We like Marshall McLuhan. Okay? He's a decent guy. Interestingly, Marshall McLuhan isn't a media studies person. Marshall McLuhan was a literature professor at the University of Toronto. But he wrote an extremely important book in 1964, which became foundational in terms of understanding the role of media in everyday life. That book is called Understanding Media. Now, over the next 3 years, you are going to be directed towards that book many, many, many times. I would recommend that everyone reads it. I would recommend that you only read the first couple of chapters of it, though, because the rest of it you don't need to. But what McLuhan says in the first couple of chapters is very, very important. And you are going to be led to it. So when you all have to do MS 200 next year, Theorising Media, which is a compulsory module, you will have to look at McLuhan. If you do social media with me, you'll have to look at McLuhan. If you do critical game studies with me, you'll have to look at McLuhan. If you do anything involving digital media, you'll have to look at Marshall McLuhan. So Marshall McLuhan is somebody that I introduce in this module because I know he's going to be a foundational part of a lot of other modules that you do over the next 3 years. And Marshall McLuhan's key contribution is that little sentence at the beginning there. The medium is the message. Anyone heard that ever before? That phrase, the medium is the message. And that's going to be the focus of the lecture today, to get you to understand what Marshall McLuhan meant by the medium is the message. The change that we're looking at today is that we're not going to be looking at ownership, we're not going to be looking at ideological content. Instead, we are going to be looking at stuff. Media studies is not just about media content, it is also about physical media. And I'm going to give you a little demonstration of how wide-ranging the concept of media is. How's the lighting in here right now? It's all right? It's lit, right? There is light. Okay? That's good. Okay. How's the lighting now? Not so good, right?
No.
Better?
Yeah.
You're into this, right? Okay. It's that whole thing. It's not so impressive right now. So, by a flick of a switch, I have changed the conditions in this room. For some of you, it is now a struggle to look over the room at me. For those of you who could be fucked to look at me in the first place, because it's not like, it's not like you're looking at an oil painting, I get that. But, if you're paying attention, it's become a struggle to do that now. Light, in this context, is a medium. What the light does as a medium is makes visible things which are not visible previously. Does anyone know when the light bulb was invented? Any guesses? Does anyone know who invented it? Tesla. Edison. You knew it was one of the two, right? So, one of the first inventions of electricity is the light bulb, invented in the 19th century. The effect of the light bulb is far-reaching. As a medium, the light bulb did something very, very important. It extended the day. Okay? So before you had light bulbs, how did you illuminate things in the night? Fire. Yeah, fire. We had fire, but fire is not really a safe thing to be using very much. If you're anything like me, fire was a fascination when you were a child. I loved fire. And I would use fire to entertain myself during the entertainment sparse 1990s by like setting fire to bins and bus stops and pensions and other shit that needed to be burnt. Okay? So fire's not a great thing, but it can lead to having a lot of fun. But with the invention of the light bulb, you have a consistent way of illuminating the dark. So guess what people did with that? They carried on their day. Things that we only did in the day, like work, all of a sudden became things you could do at night. All of a sudden you create what's called a nighttime economy. People didn't like walking in the streets before the light bulb because lighting was inconsistent, wasn't particularly bright. You could get filled in, you could get beaten up, it's a lot like Swansea City Centre now, quite frankly, even with light bulbs. But once you get a consistent way of lighting over time, you open up spaces which couldn't be used previously. All of a sudden everything is light. Everything is consistently light. The light bulb is a medium. It transforms the conditions of being a human being. And that's McLuhan's contribution to media studies. Not to understand mediums as things which carry entertainment, but instead to understand mediums in a way which tells us that a medium has an effect on humanity itself. That it changes the way we are as people. This is McLuhan's contribution to media studies. You might think, okay, you've pulled that out of your arse statement. He doesn't talk about light bulbs. Oh yes, he does. There's a whole chapter in Understanding Media about the light bulb. I know this because I've read it. So, we're going to talk about technology and society. How media technology transforms society today. Do you have any questions before we begin? No? Key things that we're going to talk about: technology and causation, 4 communication cultures as they've been identified by McLuhan, and I'm going to add a 5th. Medium is the message, that key phrase, and the idea of technological determinism, which actually becomes really important when you study McLuhan. But let's not waste any time at this point. Okay, by a show of hands, who has sent a message to somebody this morning? Do we have 100%? Yeah, I can put myself up for this as well. Why not? Anti-social. That's all that is. Have you read any messages?
No.
What?
I avoid them.
to avoid it, what are you going to press? In the morning. What do you want a full, Gus? What's yours is yours. I'm here for you, I'm supporting you. Okay? Okay, so we've all sent messages, well, nearly all sent messages this morning. Wonderful. One of the primary modes of communication in the contemporary world is the instant message. Okay? Open up your phone, you got a notification. Tap the notification, reply, bang, done. Doesn't matter where people are, doesn't matter where in the world they are. You know, be somebody from Australia, right? It's there in instant. You know? 100 years ago, how did you get a message to somebody in Australia? Ship. Yeah, that's absolutely right, yeah. Be a hell of a pigeon to fly from Britain to Australia, to be fair. That pigeon would be badass. I suspect it might get lost. It's a long way. No, yeah, you'd write the letter, take it on a ship, right? How long do you reckon that would take? Minimum a month, if you were lucky, possibly longer. So it's not going to be a short amount of time. So, instant messaging has transformed the way that we communicate with one another, because literally it is instantaneous. Who can tell me how it works? Used to work that way. Okay. So, you have a device, yeah? Are we okay so far? Am I going too fast? No? Alright, okay. You have a device. That device has a piece of software on it, or an application. That application takes your message and cuts it up, basically into thousands of parts. We call those bits. Those bits are then communicated via wireless protocols to a receiver, which eventually transmits them to a server. The wireless part is only the end-to-end bit, because all the rest of it is physical stuff, cables and wires. Once it goes to a server, it then gets routed through a series of servers until it reaches its destination point, which is indicated by the address which is allocated to the account on the same application that you are using at that point in time. So, you have basically thousands of pieces of information being sent through wireless protocols and cables to another person. And this is done instantaneously. You can send something 10,000 miles and it happens literally in real time. The lag on it is less than a second. That is how wireless communication basically works in the contemporary world. It's all dependent on physical stuff, big cables underground, big cables over the ocean, under the oceans, I should say, rather than over, and a whole bunch of stuff. We've got a router in here, probably outside, right? And you need a piece of software and a phone in order to do it. It's an incredible system that relies on governments, companies, software developers, etc. Thousands and thousands of people putting in hundreds of thousands of hours of work, massive engineering works, etc. And we don't think about any of it, because what we do with it happens in an instant. This is how instant messaging works. Now, the point about the medium is this. As I said, to do that 100 years ago required you to do specific things. You had to sit with a pen and a piece of paper and physically write out the message. You then had to put that message in another piece of paper and take it to a post office, where you had to pay for it to be posted to another country. That would have been then transported from the post office through a series of transport depots to a port somewhere, who would have loaded it onto a boat. That boat would have set sail to another port, and your letter would have been taken off along with lots of other letters and put on another boat, which would have sailed to another port. Because they didn't actually sail like all the way from like Southampton to Sydney. This went in series of different journeys. Eventually, your message would reach Australia. It would be taken out of the bag that it was transported in. They would look at the address, and then they would undergo much the same process that they did in the UK. So, what does that mean? Well, it means this. You didn't send messages to Australia. You didn't like text your friend who's on a gap year in Australia in 100 years ago, because one, nobody was on a gap year in Australia because it took fucking 2 months to get there, and two, and there was nothing there as well. That's a very important point. And two, it would have taken a lot of money and a lot of time to get the most basic message, and then you have to wait for the next one to come back, which is going to take a lot of other time. So effectively, we didn't communicate globally in that way, which meant that when we did have to communicate with people globally, it tended to be messages of a certain type, important messages. You didn't just send, a message saying, "Hey, how's it going? What's the weather like?" That's not really justifying all the time that it would take to actually send a message. You might send a really important message about a piece of business, or about some political event, about some war or something like that, or someone dying, but you're not going to be committing small talk. So, instant messaging hasn't just changed the way that we communicate and the method of communication. It's also changed how we communicate. It's now fine to send a very quick message to your friend in Australia because it takes no time at all. It's like they're next to you. There's no difference to this. Therefore, society itself has changed because of this. We now communicate more often. We communicate more openly. We communicate in ways that that was not possible to communicate in the past, simply because the barriers to communication were far too large in the past. Now we've reduced those barriers, which means we can communicate with people. And that's gone hand in hand with things like international travel and so on. So now it means if you want to go and study in Australia, knock yourself out. What's the problem? You can stay in touch with your family, you can stay in touch with your friends. I mean, we communicate more via apps than we do person to person anyway, so is it going to be any different? Instant messaging has changed the way that we communicate as human beings. And this, my friends, is a very, very important thing, so you need to write it down. Instant messaging is a form of digital media. And what digital media in general has done is annihilated, that's a beautiful word, annihilated time and space. The gaps that existed between us in the past, in terms of time, in terms of space, no longer exist. We can do things in real time around the world, whereas previously we simply couldn't. The mediums of digital media have annihilated the spatial and temporal distances between human beings. And instant messaging is one example of that. Any questions so far? No? Excellent. When we think in terms of impact, the impacts on individuals are also extreme. I've just explained that it costs virtually, the difference in cost between communicating internationally now and in the past is considerable. In the past, it was a very expensive business. When I was a kid, my dad worked in India, and I didn't speak to him for like months and months at a time. Why? Because I couldn't ring him in India. Now, they've phones in India. Do you know how much it cost to call India in the 1990s? My father himself would have ran back to Wales and strangled me if I had tried to ring him, because it would cost a fortune. Now it doesn't cost anything. I can just ring somebody via WhatsApp. It costs literally nothing. So the cost to the consumer of actually communicating with other people has dropped to virtually zero. All we need is the outlay originally on the device and we're good to go. But with that, we have illiteracy. Can anyone tell me why? Why have literacy rates been affected by instant messaging? It's language. Explain.
Kind of shorten up words instead of saying why you use like you.
Exactly. Instead of saying 2, you use the number 2. Yeah. Instead of, you know stuff, right? So you might think, well, that's only a marginal sort of thing. It isn't. That's had a profound effect on people's ability to communicate in written form. Now, universities have been really slow to react to this. We're getting better. But the truth is, we shouldn't give people as many essays as we do. Simply because, in general, people write far less today because we use abbreviated forms to communicate in a written way. That becomes a general standard of how people communicate in written form. It means writing in a very academic style is alien to a lot of people. So the effect of instant messaging isn't limited to the messaging itself. It's actually got profound effects in terms of how we communicate in other ways as well. It becomes a standard way of communicating. It doesn't happen so much, I'm going to be honest. Like, I don't get like people like using the number 2 instead of 2 in essays. But I do get it in emails. People will email me and use a you instead of you. That really pisses me off. Really makes me angry. And when I see who's done that, I'm prejudiced against them for the rest of their degree. And do you know when they go up and collect their degree certificate? You know, when they go on the stage and walk across and go and meet the Vice Chancellor and get their bit of paper? I hope they fall. Because that would be funny as fuck. Because they sent me an email with you in it. Damn it. I haven't gone so far as to try and trip something yet, but I will. I'm going to do it one day. If somebody ever uses the number 2 instead of 2, I'm just going to run on stage and peg them up in the middle of it. So, we also have physical ailments from instant messaging. Now, the BlackBerry thumb isn't a thing anymore because we don't have buttons on phones anymore. But 10, 15 years ago, people started developing calluses on their thumbs because they were using BlackBerry phones so much to message people that they started developing thumbs. What we do have is an explosion in repetitive strain injuries. People use their phones so much and use them in a weird way. If you think about like how you've got to hold it like this, you basically develop a claw over time. And then people have got really, really weird finger movements and so on. We have the wonderful phenomena of pedestrian accidents. If any fucking idiot ever walks out in front of my car looking at their phone again, I'm going to put my foot down and I'm going to put my windscreen wipers on. I'm sick of braking for these clowns. You've all done it. Literally, you've all done it. I saw someone do it this morning. Literally walk out in front of a bus as I was walking to the lecture theatre today. On campus. Bus is driving along, la 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 la, bus has to put the brakes on. Again, if I was the bus driver, I wouldn't have done that. And let's be fair, they're not going to do any damage to the bus. You know, you just go over, mash the person, it's all good. You know, maybe you have to clean it off with a power washer, I don't know, but you know, it's probably going to be all good. Like. Other extreme effects. Loss of community. One of the advocated effects of an instant messaging culture has been the idea that we no longer meet with one another. Instead, we conduct all our communication via instant messaging. So, can somebody please tell me how when I was a teenager, did I meet with my friends? Yeah.
Throw rocks at their houses.
Throw rocks at their houses. That's not friends, man. I mean, I'm not saying that's not something I did, but it's not. That's not really friends.
Talk about a time I used to meet and just cross the
Yeah. Can you imagine? You went to school, and then you said, "We're going to meet tonight at 6 in the park," and then you trusted that people would come. And more often than not, they did. Now, you're also proposing here that we didn't have other means of communication. We could like use a telephone, but because telephones did exist in the 1990s. I hope everyone's clear on that. It wasn't that bad, but then that involved phoning somebody's telephone in their house with the possibility that like their mother was going to pick it up, and then you were like, "Oh my God, Mrs. Williams, yeah, is Stephen there, please?" And you can't talk because obviously other people's mothers are the scariest thing in the history of the world, right? So you didn't want to go through that embarrassment. So yeah, you arranged to meet people in this. It involved more trust. And moreover, it involved people actually wanting to perform the same things. People wanting to get together outside. People wanting to meet down the pub at a particular time. You didn't have the option of sending somebody a message 5 minutes before you were supposed to be there saying, "I'm not going. Yeah, I've got something on. Can't do it." You felt really bad if that happened, so you did it anyway. And then you became an alcoholic. It's not so good. Things like instant messaging have been used to boost turnout for elections by reminding people to actually go and vote, having serious campaigns to do this. Helps group organisation. Next year, well, I don't know, maybe even this year, you're going to be put in groups to do group work in some of your modules, right? I hate group work. I hate group work in modules. I used to have group work in this module and I stopped it because I hate the idea of people getting on with each other. I want people to be in adversity. This is a competition, people. I'm grading you on a curve, okay? Some are good and some are bad. All coordination of group work projects, as it seems to me, goes on via message groups. There is no coordination in any other way. It has been areas which have used instant messaging in a proactive way have indicated that you can reduce crime by having community groups who report incidents as they occur. It has been shown that this can reduce crime. It's also a wonderful way of increasing crime. Because as you might know, the British government has been involved for many years now in trying to remove end-to-end encryption on instant messenger apps. The reason why it wants to do this is it argues, our government, that in order to uncover who's a terrorist, uncover who's involved in activities like paedophilia and so on, we need to have no encryption of messages. Because this is how criminal groups are communicating with one another. Because end-to-end encryption means that messages can't be intercepted by anyone else. Unfortunately, the British government is not run by very intelligent people. If you get rid of end-to-end encryption, it also means that you could never send a payment via the internet ever again, because you would have no secure protocols to actually send money to people, which means that the entire economy would collapse within about 5 seconds if you got rid of end-to-end encryption. So we're not actually dealing with sensible people here. For my purposes, there has been a decline in academic standards through instant messaging, kind of. Apparently, maybe. Do I care? No, I still get paid. But one of the overriding discourses, remember I used the word discourse last week, one of the overriding discourses about culture today is that our culture is less well read, less communicative, less able to communicate in a sensible form because of the presence of this kind of communication. We now communicate in short, abbreviated forms, and therefore can't sustain arguments, can't sustain attention, can't sustain the ability to read arguments, etc. This is maybe a problem. These arguments are all examples of what is called technological determinism. Has anyone in this room ever encountered this term before? No? Fantastic. A technologically determinist argument argues that technology is the primary driver of change in a society. That a new technology comes along and society changes because of that. It's a very, very dangerous argument because it puts all power in society in the hands of technology, and therefore argues that human beings aren't responsible for societal change. Instead, it's the technology that we use which is responsible. So you invent the technology, then you see some effects, and then change comes from it. And it takes human beings out of the loop. What we need to note is that it is humans that use technology. How we use it and what we use it for is actually the primary determinant of change in society, not the technology itself. What we do with it is really important. For example, the internet as a technology. Does anyone know why the internet was invented? And when, actually? Interesting question in itself. I love giving people knowledge. It's so much fun. So, the internet was invented effectively in the 1960s by the American military. The Department of Military that invented it was called DARPA. It is a specialized group in the American military that is there to basically invent new technologies. And DARPA set up a network in the 1960s with one very specific purpose. In the 1960s, the United States and the Soviet Union were involved in what is called the Cold War. And as part of the Cold War, both of these countries stockpiled tens of thousands of nuclear weapons and basically aimed them at one another. And said, if you do anything, we're going to annihilate you. So you had, for 40 years, two massive countries squaring off to each other with the potential to destroy every life on the planet. The American government thought, well, if there's a possibility that there could be life after such an event as this, how are we going to get back to normal? And one of the things that they identified as being extremely important is having the ability to communicate with one another. So the American government set about looking at how can we develop a system which can withstand, a communication system that can withstand a nuclear attack. Because contemporary systems back then were basically hubs. The Soviet Union could have targeted all the American intelligence which was stored in particular places, and it would have wiped out all their communication systems. So what they looked to do is try and invent a system that couldn't be wiped out by a nuclear threat. That even if all the bombs in the world went off, it would still be there. So they invented what was called DARPANET. And DARPANET was a system that didn't have a core. So if you have a core to a system, you can launch a bomb. You can know about it and you can put something there. You can knock out communications. So what the American government decided and military decided instead is, we're not going to have a core. Instead, we're going to put all the cores in a ring. So every system, every node in the network has the same amount of intelligence as every other node. So if you knock one out, the system still works. It just rejoins to one another. Every bit of the network communicates with every other bit of the network. There isn't one thing that flows into the middle. Instead, everything flows around. And they called it DARPANET. And it worked. They switched it on in 1967. started sending messages to other parts of the network. It worked fine. And it's basically how the internet works today. There is no internet. There's no middle thing that everything flows to. Instead, every node on the network, like this, is just as important as every other node on the network. And if I was to take this and smash it, bad times, the internet would still work. You know, your phone wouldn't work, but the internet would be just fine without your phone. Because every part of the network can drop out, but the overall system still exists. This is what's called today the internet. Now, those people who invented that system had no idea that people would be using it to send messages to one another. They had no idea that people would be using it to watch repeats of Friends in a binge watching session on Netflix. They had no idea Netflix was going to exist. They had no idea that one of the primary uses of the internet was going to be the sharing of sexually explicit materials, which it still is. They had no idea what any of this stuff was going to be. They didn't understand the consequences of what they actually did. Because it was actually people who started using the internet for all those things. The internet existed as a particular system which allowed us to do things. We call that an affordance. Every piece of media has particular affordances to us. But what we do with it is up to us. And that's where historical change comes from. Now, the reason why I raise this here is because when we talk about things like instant messaging, we can fall into what's called a technologically determinist argument. We can say, instant messaging was invented and it changed the world. So, no. Instant messaging, yes, it was invented, but it didn't change the world. How we use instant messaging changes the world, not the messaging system itself. Messaging system itself doesn't do anything. If it wasn't for people using it, it would just sit there useless as a particularly useless brick. But instead, because of how we use it, it becomes fundamental to how society changes. So, if you decide to write an essay about McLuhan, you need to be careful to avoid this sort of argument. Now, hands up who can drive. Fantastic. Keep your hands up and only let your hands go down if you drive without using your phone to navigate. Only put your hands down if you do that. You fucking liars. Everyone uses their phone to navigate. Didn't get what I was saying. Okay, let's try it again. Put your hands up if you can drive. Okay. Okay. Put your hands down if you drive without the aid of a mobile phone for navigation. You lie. You're not really a driver then, you're more of like a taxi service for your parents or something. I mean, I use it. Now, you can put your hands down now, it's going to get tiring now. Okay. Why do you do that? Why would you use, okay, we can extend this a little bit now. You might well use your phone actually to find your way around places when you're walking as well. Why do we do that? Why? Yeah.
Makes it so much easier to find places.
So much easier to... So? What are you trying to avoid?
Get lost.
Getting lost. What's so bad about getting lost?
It eats time up.
It eats time up, so it's becoming more... You want to be more efficient. You want to use your time efficiently, right? You don't want to get lost. We live in a culture which says that getting lost is actually a scary thing. You know, in order to be safe, don't get lost. Yeah? And especially in your car, you don't want to get lost because you could end up in a bad area, right? You know, can you imagine driving around Swansea and you got lost? You could end up in Town Hill or Bonmine or something, and then they'll strip every fucking part of your car probably, and you know, turf you out onto the road, and you know, strip you and paint you and put you in some kind of wicker man and then burn you, because that's what happens if you get lost in Swansea, right? That doesn't happen. Getting lost is fine. I've got lost lots of times. Do you know what? You have some really good adventures when you get lost. I've got lost so many times and woken up 2 days later, married to a Mexican woman. You know, it's good times ensue when you get lost. But we now have the phenomena that people use navigational aids all the time when they're driving. I just do it by course because I like to listen to Spotify in the car. I plug my phone into my car and the map just comes up. It comes up automatically, right? So and eventually over time I come to rely on it because it's always present with me. It's not necessarily, you know, I don't really go places that I don't know either, but the map is always there. So if I do need to go anywhere else, the map is always there to guide me. Why do we trust it? What on earth are we doing? We are trusting something that we have no part in. We're trusting usually one company, it's usually Google Maps that do this. So we're trusting Google to help us. Why? Why does Google give a shit if we get somewhere on time? Has anyone taken a car or been in a car or driven a car where you can say that Google's taken you the wrong way? All the time. This is not an uncommon sight. Google takes you down a road that doesn't exist. Just because it exists on Google's system does not mean it exists. And people trust what has been told. So, again, going back to this entire argument, we have a medium, the map. We have a medium delivered in a particular way. And because of that, we put a certain amount of trust in it. So as an entire society, we decided to change the way that we navigate, and instead we put all our trust in a particular technological system. And then it goes wrong. And people are like, a lot of you will have moved to Swansea, but is there anyone from the Swansea area here in the room? Nobody at all. I know a couple of people are lying, because I know some people from Swansea. Ben, do you know where this village of Gowerton is? Somewhat. Okay. So, in Gowerton, which is a village about 4 miles from here, I would say, as you head in towards Lathy in West Wales, there is a bridge. It's a very, very low bridge that connects Gowerton to the town of Gorsina. And every couple of months, a lorry shears the top of itself off under that bridge. It happens regular as clockwork. Because all the lorry drivers use these bloody things instead of actually looking to see my lorry can't get under that bridge. It is a railway bridge, it can't be taken away, it can't be replaced, it's not going anywhere, and I guarantee you we are due for one. The last one was in the summer. It is going to happen again. And then the whole village of Gowerton gets completely clogged in traffic for about 12 hours while they work out how to get this fucking lorry out of the way, which has actually crashed into a railway bridge. Happens all the time because we rely on this sort of stuff. So, instead of drivers trusting their judgment, which is what you have to do in the past, you trust that now. Our way of even understanding what it is to drive has been transformed by the presence of this technology. Are we starting to get what a medium actually means? Good. Let's take a break. 5 minutes.